Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Alexander Palamara, and we're going to discuss long-term disability insurance claims for law enforcement officers. And Alex, I know your brother's a police officer in our county here, and you were a former prosecutor, so was I, so we know a lot about law enforcement, having worked with tons of law enforcement over the years, everything from police to DEA to every aspect of the police department, plus we've represented hundreds of law enforcement officers across the country. Law enforcement is an interesting dynamic in terms of an occupation. Clearly it's not one where the disability carriers say that you have a sedentary job, and these policies are ERISA exempt, which we'll get into in a minute, which is great because the police officers and law enforcement are not stuck with the inability to have a jury trial.
Correct.
If they need one. However, they still usually have group employer-provided disability policies that may not have the best language in the world because they didn't buy the policy on their own. So in this video, I want to provide some tips for people that are either considering applying for disability benefits, they've been on claim, or they've been denied, and talk about how we help these law enforcement officers in this position, and also provide some tips to keep them on claim or help them with the application process. So first thing is, when someone contacts you, whether they've applied or been denied, no matter what scenario they're at, why is it important for you to see their disability policy?
I mean, every policy is a little bit unique. The one thing you have to realize, especially most group disability insurance policies, unfortunately, even though your occupation is a law enforcement officer, most policies have what's known as a change in definition of disability. So for the first 2 years, in order to prove to the insurance company that you're disabled, you have to prove that you can't do the material and substantial duties of your own occupation. Then more often than not, in most group policies, after the 2-year mark, it becomes a little bit more difficult to qualify for benefits. At that point, you have to prove that you can't do any occupation for which you're qualified based on your training, education, and experience. Let's just say you're a typical police officer. After 2 years, the insurance company might say, hey, you can go be a security guard now. You have the background to be a, with your training and history of being a police officer. Right. Now you can be a security guard as long as that security guard position pays a certain income level under most policies. Sometimes it's 60%, sometimes it's as high as 80%. But that's why when you mentioned earlier the language of the policies is so important, because most of these policies have this change in definition of disability. Some do not. If it's in there, while it's not the most favorable language, there's still ways to get around this language to prove that somebody's disabled. I mean, depending on their disabling conditions and depending on the proof they have for their disabling conditions, there are certain ways to get around the 24-month limiting language or 24-month change in definition of disability. The other thing is that a lot of these policies have mental health limiting language as well, where they'll only pay disability benefits for a mental health condition for 24 months. And this day and age, what's going on around the country, being a law enforcement officer is harder than ever. Being a police officer is harder than being a person on the ground, on the streets is harder than ever. And there are mental health claims to be made just because of the abuse that many police officers are dealing with on a regular basis. Not only do they have the typical difficulties of being a police officer, that's pulling over cars with dark tinted windows, you don't know who's behind that dark tinted window, or going into a house on a warrant and whatnot. Now they have people that give them a hard time for no other reason than being a police officer. So there are mental health claims to be made, but you have to realize that mental health claims can be limited to 24 months under both policies because of the language in the policy.
Right, so while the job of being in law enforcement has clearly become more stressful than it already was without the societal views we have against law enforcement that's currently going on now, if you make a claim because you have anxiety, you have depression, or even PTSD, which is very common with law enforcement, there could be limitations in the policy that police officers need to be aware of.
100%.
What makes these claims often unique, though, as compared to many of the other disability claims we've had, is that probably more than half of the law enforcement officers we represent have had on-the-job injuries.
Yep.
And that makes it somewhat complicated because then they end up with workers' compensation claim as well if they're injured on the job. And workers' compensation is often offset to long-term disability coverage.
Right.
But workers' compensation doesn't last forever. It only goes for a certain period of time, whereas the long-term disability policy can last to age 65. Often in the groups, that's where it's going to end, or to your Social Security retirement age, which could be 67, 68. But as long as you're continuing to get workers' comp, then they may offset that amount. But talk about this workers' comp offset potentially being only for wages and shouldn't be for medical, and why that can help increase the value of the long-term disability policy.
Right. So the good point that you're making is that, while the disability insurance policies typically pay 60% of your prior monthly earnings, so let's just say you're making 100 grand a year, they should be paying you 60 grand a year divided up by 12 months.
Right.
So I guess about $5,000 a month if you're in that scenario. But if you're getting workers' comp pays pretty high. And sometimes it can pay even higher than a disability insurance policy on a monthly basis. So that in that scenario, your disability insurance policy might end up paying you a minimum benefit amount per month, which might be something minimal of $100 or maybe up to 10% of your gross monthly benefit. And like you said, though, workers' compensation typically, I think, ends around 2 years, or there's a settlement prior to the 2-year mark.
Right.
At that point, your long-term disability should kick in and pay you the gross monthly benefit, unless there's other offsets. So there could be other offsets as well. You can make a pension claim. Any money that you get from your pension would be an offset. Most law enforcement officers do not pay into Social Security, but if they did, there could be a Social Security offset as well. But any other benefits that you could be receiving would be an offset to your disability insurance claim, would lower the amount of money that the insurance company has to pay you per month.
And so another issue that's somewhat complicated with the workers' comp being involved, and it can go longer than 2 years, but you talked about this change of definition from own occupation, which means unable to do the duties of a law enforcement officer, basically, to any gainful occupation based upon experience, education, and training. And it may have an income component, so they may say you have to be able to do a job that will pay you 60% of what you used to make. The challenge is, though, is that if the law enforcement officer is treating with a workers' comp doctor, the workers' comp doctor is basically documenting saying, I don't think you can do law enforcement, but they may not be limiting that particular law enforcement officer to any other gainful occupation. So how do you, if the workers' comp doctor won't support any gainful occupation, but they're only supporting inability to do law enforcement, then after 24 months, you may get denied for your long-term disability. So, and workers' comp doctors are generally like high volume.
100%.
They're not getting paid much at all, and they're not interested in working with the claimant against the insurance company. So how do you deal with this situation and anticipate this situation knowing that it's going to come up?
Yeah, sometimes you have to convince your client that you have to go above and beyond that treatment that you're getting from the workers' comp doctor, because the only way you can prove your claim for disability insurance benefit is with proof. So you have to go to other doctors, depending on your disabling conditions, whether it's a back condition, go to see an ortho, or whatever you're suffering from. You have to go to the right specialist so you can document what you're suffering from. It's difficult, but proof is everything to your claim. Whether it's objective testing you can have done, whether it's a functional capacity evaluation, X-rays, MRIs, whatever it is to prove your disabling condition, you have to do it. You have to go above and beyond. Because the insurance companies, what they love to do is they love to deny claims. They don't care if you're a police officer for 25 years, hurt in the line of duty. They say too bad, so sad. They're not they're not Santa Claus. You know what I mean? They don't give away free money. So they're going to give you a tough time no matter who you are, and it's your duty to prove your claim. So you have to go above and beyond, see the appropriate providers, appropriate specialists, and get those records into the insurance company.
Right, and you can't get caught, Alex, in saying, well, my workers' comp claim won't approve it, and then it gets complicated. Do you still have health insurance? How do you pay for the other doctor? But the bottom line is, and we work with the law enforcement officers all the time to help get them to the doctor, you can't be stuck with the workers' comp doctor who's not going to support you. You got to think proactively. You got to do something else, and we got to get you to the appropriate doctors, whether workers' comp will pay for it, health insurance, or if it's going to be a self-pay, it just has to be done because it could be a small price to pay once every 4 months or 3 months in order to keep benefits going, which could potentially be a couple $1,000s every month.
But sometimes you have to invest into your own claim sometimes.
Right.
I think that has to be done in order to get your benefits, and if you invest $1,000 every couple months, at least you're going to be getting fivefold that in your monthly benefits. Sometimes you have to, and maybe you have to go every 3 or 4 months. Maybe after a little while, it can be stretched out to 6 months or 12 months. Whatever the doctor thinks is appropriate level of treatment for you.
And then I wanted the claimants to understand as well that the claim is only as good as it's documented on paper. And I know you said you have to have the proof, but the quality of the proof is important. It's not enough to just go to the doctor. The doctor's got to be putting all of the complaints in the records with great detail. Your symptoms have to be in there. If you're having pain, that has to be in there. If you're limited in how long you can sit, how long you can stand, how long you can walk, reaching, bending, things like that have to be documented in there. And we often suggest that people keep a symptom log or a pain log where they document things that were difficult for them on a daily basis, or what were they limited in, and then sharing that information with the doctor and letting the doctor say, I was presented with a daily symptom log and I documented in this log the following things, and then it's in the records. Because if it's not in the records,
Right.
it doesn't exist, and there's the proof that you're talking about, there's no proof to prove the claim. So it sounds funny to say that, but that's what it requires. These disability companies say on average that a claim lasts for 34 to 36 months. Why is that the average? Why is someone out for 3 years, and then typically the disability insurance company says, in a way, it's like an unwritten rule, like, we're going to really try to give you a hard time at that point and cut the claim?
I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. That's what they say. I mean, I have a lot of people calling me from the get-go. They get denied from day one, or they get denied, a couple months in, or they get denied of that change in definition of disability. A lot of the times, maybe they go a little bit beyond the 24 months, and sometimes some policies have a 36-month change in definition of disability. But I see people getting denied all day, every day. So I wouldn't even think that's even true, that most claims last 36 months.
So you think it's shorter?
I think it's shorter until we get involved and we do our best either to get the client back on claim with an appeal, or we do our best by filing that lawsuit and litigating the case to the end.
And in terms of if a lawsuit is filed, because we talked about applying, and we talked about, to keep yourself on claim, you have to maintain your records constantly and always see the doctor and submit your claim forms and attending physician statements. If a lawsuit needs to be filed, considering these are not subject to ERISA, a law enforcement officer has the opportunity to file in basically mostly it would probably be in state court unless there was greater than $75,000 in controversy, then it could go in federal court. What's a typical time frame you see for these lawsuits from start to finish?
I mean, it could be as high as 2 years, depending on what court you're in. Some courts have fast tracked, and a trial could be 6 months or 12 months away, but typically I'd say an 18-month mark is the normal spot where a case will actually come to trial, maybe a little bit longer. Not all cases go to trial. I'd probably say the great majority of cases, whether it's a disability insurance claim or whether it's a criminal case, it's still
Right.
a lawsuit, or whether it's a slip and fall car accident case. Most cases end up settling. Probably the great majority, probably 90% of cases, maybe
Right.
higher, settle. And a settlement can occur once you file the lawsuit, a couple weeks in, or a couple months in, or the night before trial. But if you were to go to trial, I'd probably expect the trial 18 to 24 months from the day you file your lawsuit. But it's a really big advantage that these policies are not governed by ERISA. It really is. I mean, like you said earlier, there's a right to a jury trial. Standard of review is different. Proof that's required is different. It's like ERISA really is a terrible thing. So the fact that these law enforcement officers, whether you work for a sheriff's office or a police department, a city police department, or whether you're a detention deputy, whatever aspect that you work, it's a really great advantage that your claim is not governed by ERISA. It really is.
So, and Alex, when you file these lawsuits, the cause of action is called a breach of contract, because basically you bought this contract or you got it as an employee benefit, and the insurance company said, if you meet this qualification, we'll pay you this benefit each month that you remain eligible. And so because it's a contract and there's a set monthly benefit amount, when you go to trial, it's not like your typical personal injury trial where you're asking for pain and suffering or damages that are of a unknown number, because you can't put a price on what someone's pain is. But in this, if the policy pays $5,000 a month and it's $60,000 a year and there's 10 years left, then we know it's worth $600,000. That's the value. And like you said, that 90% of these cases often settle with a lump sum settlement. The disability insurance companies are typically going to put some kind of offer on the table, and if the case is worth $600,000 and they hypothetically offer you $300,000, then the claimant needs to make a business decision at that point and say, if my upside is $600,000 and they're guaranteeing me $300,000 right now, do I want to go through a trial to try to double my money? plain and simple, we will advise the claimants as to what we think is best. We'll do whatever they want, and the claimant makes the ultimate decision. But it becomes a pure business decision, and it's often hard for claimants to set aside their emotions of feeling like they've been screwed over by an insurance company. At this point, they've waited 9 months, a year, or more to even get to this point. So the nice thing is that especially if we accept the case, there's likely going to be some kind of settlement offer and money for the claimant to consider without having to just go to trial just to get something. So that's a typical scenario that a person should expect, but it is going to take some time, and it's not going to happen from the moment that a lawsuit's filed.
I mean, we hope to get the people on claim, either with an application or assisting them with
Right.
an application or assisting them with an appeal. But if it's not possible, then we'll file that lawsuit. So hopefully we don't get to that point of a lawsuit, but if we do, we're more than happy to litigate it all the way to the end and help them make the best decision for themselves and their family. And I often tell my clients that ultimately I'm the navigator and you're the pilot. I can tell you that the right move is to turn right, and if they want to turn left, that's their decision to turn left. We can only provide them with the best information available to us and to them, and explain to them the case law, explain to them our history, what we've done in past cases and whatnot, to what to expect, so they can make the best decision for themselves and ultimately for their family.
Well, thank you for the helpful information today. And if you are a law enforcement officer, no matter what stage your claim is at, even if you haven't even filed yet or you've been the other extreme of denied, feel free to contact Alex or myself. Any of our disability lawyers will immediately answer your call or your email when you reach out to us. We'll provide you with an immediate free consultation. We also encourage you to search our website where you can look up other cases involving law enforcement disability cases around the country. You can search by your medical condition. You can search specifically by your insurance company, which is always a great idea because we want you to know how your disability insurance company thinks. And the more you can start to think like your disability insurance company, the better position you're going to be in to protect your disability benefits. So we always put out these videos. We welcome you to also subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can continue to get helpful tips that hopefully will help you to secure your disability benefits. And we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you should you need us in the future. Thank you.